Hello everyone, I'm Professor Plink. I respond to various theological and ideological questions and claims from a rationalistic and naturalistic approach in an effort to give and explain the opposite viewpoint and help to balance the conversation. If you end up liking what you see in this video and would like to help out the channel, make sure to subscribe and click the bell so you'll always be notified when new content comes out. And of course, like this video, maybe pop in a comment. All that goes a long way towards pleasing the YouTube algorithm in all its digital glory and keeping my channel motoring along. Now on to today's video. Today we're going to be looking at a video from a channel called Redeemed Zoomer, who claims that he is going to answer all atheists' arguments. Now I already don't like the premise, because strictly speaking, atheists don't have a lot of arguments that we make. Atheism isn't a position that needs to be justified or rationally argued for. Atheism is the rejection of the God claim. And the position of not accepting a claim does not need arguments in order to prove it. It's the claim that needs proving. So this already seems like an attempt to reverse the burden of proof. However, with religious affiliation and theistic belief being the majority position across most of the world, atheists are often called to account for their detraction from that standard standpoint. And in doing so, we atheists often do offer up several arguments for why we are non-believers, why we do not accept the theistic position that many other people accept so readily. So, in that regard, one could say that atheism does have a variety of arguments that we are making in support of it. And I am interested in which ones Redeemed Zoomer is going to be talking about and which ones he's going to leave out, because I feel quite sure that he isn't going to hit all of them in the span of a single, less than 10-minute long video. But let's see what he does have to say about it and what we atheists argue for. So, over to you, RZ.
Atheists have a lot of arguments, but they never really think of anything new that the church hasn't had answers to for the past 2,000 years.
Interesting criticism of atheism, given that one of the common criticisms of theism by atheists is that there hasn't been any new pro-God or pro-religion arguments in hundreds of years. Perhaps the reason atheists don't seem to offer up anything new is that religion itself hasn't offered up anything new. And since atheism is largely a response to theism, i.e., I don't accept your claim, but here's why you should. Well, here's my debunk of that. If you aren't giving us anything new in terms of arguing for your God for us to consider and debunk, then there isn't anything for us to say other than to reiterate the same debunks that we've been using for the same pro-God arguments that you've been using. But also, this is an interesting wheel that you're showing us here. See, there's Sky Daddy. There are contradictions in the Bible that the church has never noticed. Look, here's a violent Bible verse that nobody ever noticed before. I was raised Christian and I have trauma. They said not to sin. I believe in science, so that means God can't be real. Your God did a genocide in the flood. He big meanie. I don't need a God to know murder is bad. Don't ask about abortion, though. And if God is real, why don't I have a girlfriend yet? I hope these aren't the entirety of what RZ thinks atheist arguments are, and that he's going to be addressing more in this video. Because, for one, most of these are anti-Christian arguments. They wouldn't do anything against any other religion. Atheists don't just not believe in Christianity, you know. And absent the flippant and dismissive way in which you've written them, there are some bangers here that no religion has ever properly addressed, like the problem of evil or God of the gaps. And to claim that the church has had answers to them for the last 2,000 years? If they do, I certainly haven't heard them. Unless you mean you just have to take it on faith, or God's ways are above us, so when he does what we perceive as evil, we should just trust and believe that he has good reasons. Yeah, those don't count as answers because that is batshit insane and basically amounts to shut up, sit down, keep singing God's praises, and stop questioning him. Well, no, I won't. But I won't hold you to a mocking and derisive image and hope that you have more substantive statements about them. So, carry on.
So let's answer them. Religion causes wars. Well, actually, only 7% of all human wars were caused by religion, and if you remove Islamic wars, that number drops down to 3%.
For starters, this isn't an atheistic argument. This is not a reason to not believe in God. This is an anti-religion argument. And you didn't even address the central premise of it. It wasn't that religion causes all wars, it was that religion causes wars. Period. Full stop. Which you yourself admitted to. Yeah, sure, it's true. The majority of wars are fought over things like government disputes, land disputes, one nation versus another, one ethnic group versus another, i.e. racism. But that doesn't mean that no wars are fought over religion. Also, not all wars are equal in their scope and devastation. I mean, you can't compare something like the Crusades, which killed an estimated 2 to 6 million people in Western Europe alone, at a time when the population of the area was only about 60 million, so potentially killing up to 10% of the population, and then compare that with something like, say, the British Zanzibar War of 1896, which lasted a whole 38 minutes and killed less than 500 people. But on a statistical breakdown of all the wars and their causes, both have the same power. They both count as one. So what if wars would still be fought without religion? There would certainly still be less wars. Also, why are you then removing the Muslim wars from the equation? Those don't count as religious wars all of a sudden? Again, atheists don't just have it out for Christianity specifically. We don't believe in any gods or religious practices. That includes Islam.
A lot of evil has been done in the name of religion. This is true, but the most murderous people in human history have been atheists. This doesn't mean religion is true, it just means you can't use that as an argument against it.
We don't. If it is ever used at all, it's used as an argument against organized religion, not as an argument against the existence of God. Is this whole video going to be a conflation of arguments against religion with arguments against God? Because if it is, we can just nope out right here and declare that your entire video is a non sequitur. If you're pushing back against anti-religion arguments, then deal with anti-religion. Atheist arguments are specifically reasons not to believe in God, not reasons not to follow a particular practice or religion. From here on out, if one of your points deals with anti-religion or anti-Christianity and not atheism itself, I'm just going to call it out as a non sequitur. Also, Hitler was not an atheist. He had, on multiple occasions, declared himself as a Christian. See, I can quote mine Wikipedia as well. In reality, the truth of Hitler's personal religious ideology has long been a subject of dispute. He criticized the Catholic Church and Christianity as a whole, sure. He also openly criticized atheism, too. His book, Mein Kampf, contained multiple references to God or a creator. But what is undeniable is that the wider Nazi regime and Nazi Germany as a whole was insanely Christian-dominated. 54% were Protestant, 40% Catholic, 3.5% neo-pagan, and a whole 1.5% of the population were non-believers. Let's not act like religion played no part in the attempted genocide of the Jewish people during World War II either. But yeah, overall, this isn't an atheistic argument. It's an anti-religion one.
If you were born somewhere else, you wouldn't be a Christian. Okay, and if you were born somewhere else, you wouldn't be an atheist. Everyone's beliefs are shaped by their context.
Non sequitur. Not only is this not an atheistic argument, this isn't even an anti-religion argument, it's specifically an anti-Christian argument. But it could also just as easily be applied to any religion that is the majority belief of a region in which someone is born. But also, you don't even attempt to dispute it. Seems that you agree with it. You admitted that you're only Christian because of where you were born. Your only attempted rebuttal is false, however, because I am specifically not an atheist because of where I was born. By way of where I was born and what belief system I was born into, I was and should still be a Christian. I am an atheist because I rejected the hegemonic religion of my upbringing. So unless you grew up somewhere Christianity wasn't the dominant belief and then converted into it, you seem to just be accepting that you are only a Christian because you were indoctrinated into it. But seem to just be okay with that state of affairs. And okay, sure, you can do that. But pointing the finger at atheists and saying, "Nuh-uh, you," isn't a strong answer to the claim. Especially when it isn't true of people who go against the beliefs that they were raised with.
How do you know which religion is true? Well, everyone, religious or not, has faith in a certain worldview. It's just that some worldviews are called religions and some are secular. But everyone has to ask the question of which worldview best explains the world.
That doesn't even address the question. Sure, everyone has different worldviews, but the question was why you think your religious worldview is true. Stating that everyone has a worldview is no answer to that. Okay, yeah, sure, everyone has a worldview. Some worldviews are religious, some are secular. Now, back to the question that you dodged. How do you know your religious worldview is true?
There's no scientific proof that God exists. Well, by definition, science can only prove things inside the natural world, and by definition, God is something outside the natural world, so science can neither prove nor disprove God.
You just attempted to define God into existence. You just defined God as existing outside the natural world. Well, now you have to establish that there is such a thing as outside the natural world to even exist in. Because I don't accept that it does. This is the divine hiddenness argument. And what you don't seem to understand is that simply stating it does not prove it. By definition, God can't be proven by science, so haha, take that all of science. Take all of science off the board. No science for you. We win. No, that's not how it works. Especially when we're talking about a supposed God that does interact with the natural world in supposedly countless ways. A burning bush that doesn't get consumed by the fire? That's within the natural world. A supposed global flood that defies reality, as there wouldn't be enough water on the planet to cover all the land? That is something that exists in reality. Pillars of salt, pillars of fire, water turning into blood, magically raising cities, resurrecting the dead. These are just some of the ways that your God supposedly interacts with the natural world that should and would leave physical evidence, and yet it hasn't. So as to the extension of the divine hiddenness argument goes, God would have had to have disappeared all of that evidence that we would expect to find just to keep his handiwork hidden from us. A God who supposedly wants us to know that he exists so that he can have a relationship with us. And he certainly didn't seem to have any problem showing up and proving his existence to all of those people who would have witnessed those miraculous events mentioned before. But now that we've gained the ability to scientifically test these miraculous events, they disappear from the world, leaving no trace at all. Convenient that, huh? I mean, this is the basis of God of the Gaps. Every time throughout history, physical things in the natural world have been attributed to God's power, they were later found to be entirely natural phenomena. The weather, the movement of the planets, what the stars are, how we get sick, how we heal, how we came to exist at all. Sorry, Adam and Eve pushers, but evolution is real. And when science explained damn near everything that religion wanted to say was just God using his divine God magic, and that it all defied explanation, well, then divine hiddenness started being tossed around as a viable excuse for why a God that we should be able to find through science, we in fact could not. Theology is the post hoc rationalization of what you want to believe. Realizing that God does not comport with science, so then insisting that God is outside the natural world in an attempt to take science off the table, it's just a transparent attempt to hand-wave away one of the biggest criticisms of God belief.
There's no evidence of anything supernatural. Well, that's just not accurate. There are medically documented cases of people with demonic possession speaking in languages they don't know, for example, and people with near-death experiences getting information they never had access to.
No, there aren't. There are ginned-up stories of demonic possession by religious people who claim that a person spoke in a language that they couldn't possibly know. These have never been conclusively proven. Either because the speech could easily have just been gibberish that the witness claims sounds like a language that they themselves also don't speak, so how could they possibly know? Or they could be instances of cryptomnesia, which is the phenomena of not recognizing the return of an old memory as a product of memory, but instead regarding it as new or original thoughts or ideas. How could the witness know that the person in question never learned a few passages in whatever language they're claiming that they were speaking? Seriously, all it would take is one trip to the library and they could learn enough Latin to spit out some of it during a psychological break from reality. And near-death experiences, same thing. People are near death, they are revived, and they claim that they were looking down at themselves from above and heard what the doctors were saying while they were supposedly dead. So how could that be the case unless their souls were still in the room? Well, they weren't entirely dead, since death is a process. And even when your heart has stopped, that doesn't mean that all brain activity has ceased. They very well could still hear what was going on around them when many of their bodily functions had ceased. Then they were revived, and their brain concocts an imagined scenario where they were looking down at the room from above. Not so different from dreaming that you're floating around your house when you're actually asleep in your bedroom. Again, none of these things have ever been proven to even the smallest degree. They're mostly hearsay accounts by religious people primarily who want to believe that they're true and have a vested interest in overinflating the facts of the case in order to support their point. Or are from people who don't know what they saw or experienced and then just glom onto a supernatural answer because that's easier than sussing out what is likely a far more complex natural explanation. An explanation that might require difficult study into things like human cognition or neurology, how the brain works. Demons Did It is way easier than reading a textbook on neuroscience and understanding the complex ways the human brain works and what happens when someone is having a psychotic break or near-death experience.
The Bible has contradictions. Okay, you think you found an apparent contradiction that the church hasn't known about for 2,000 years? Every apparent contradiction can be explained by understanding just a little bit of theology.
Non sequitur. This is an anti-Christian argument, not a reason to not believe in God. And as far as that goes, there are tons of direct contradictions in the Bible. And sure, the church knows about them, but other than attempting yet another revision of the Bible, which people would kinda notice them doing and probably reject, there really isn't anything you can do about it. Other than what you just said, attempt to hand-wave it away. You really didn't even offer up much of a refutation. You basically just said, you don't understand the Bible, so those aren't contradictions. Well, that isn't going to fly. This is not a valid refutation of the myriad of times the Bible says one thing, then later retracts that and changes to the exact opposite. Like, for instance, when it says in Ezekiel 18:20, "The son shall not bear the iniquity of the father." But then in Exodus 25, it says, "I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation." That's the exact opposite. Saying, oh, you just don't understand the Bible, doesn't account for why all of the Gospels continually disagree about the same story. It was Mary Magdalene who went to Jesus' tomb. No, wait, it was Mary Magdalene and Jesus' mother Mary. No, wait, also, Joanne was with them too. And when they didn't find Jesus' body there, they went home telling no one. No, wait, they told the guards who were posted outside the tomb. No, wait, they didn't tell them, they went and told Peter and John instead. They just can't keep their story straight. Even though they're saying the same story, they're getting different versions of it. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and go through the litany of contradictions that exist on practically every page of the Bible, but you don't get to toss them all with weak sauce dodges like, oh, you just need to understand the Bible better. What you mean to say is, we need to overlook every inconsistency because you want it to be true.
The Gospels were anonymous. Okay, anonymous doesn't mean we have no idea who wrote them. It just means the names of the authors aren't signed in the text itself. But we literally have writings from church fathers who knew the apostles and can verify that they indeed wrote the books named after them.
Non sequitur. This is an anti-Christian argument, not a reason not to believe in God. And also, bullshit. There's no independently verifiable evidence of who wrote the Gospels. Even though the church and its adherents want to insist that it was the apostles that they're named after, there at least is significant disagreement in biblical scholarship as to the validity of that position. Bart Ehrman has done lots of work in this area, and I would defer to him if you want a more in-depth exploration of the historicity of the Bible and its writings. But yeah, whether you believe the Gospels were written by the apostles or not, the reality is that this is not a question that has definitively been answered.
The Gospels misquote Jesus. Now, it's true that a lot of secular scholars think the Gospels are a mix of real quotes from the historical Jesus and fake quotes added by the church, but none of them can agree on which quotes are legit and which are not, so we can discard their opinions.
No, we can't. Oh, wait, for starters, non sequitur, this is an anti-Christian argument, not a reason not to believe in God. But no, just because there's no consensus on which quotes are accurate and which aren't, that most certainly does not mean that the entirety of the Bible, vis-a-vis Jesus' quotes, should be accepted in its entirety as truth. That's not how anything works. Hey, RZ, one person said that you smacked 20 babies. Another person said that that wasn't true, but it was true that you kicked 15 puppies. Another person said that wasn't true, but it was true that you cursed out 12 old ladies. Well, there doesn't seem to be any consensus between the claimants, so I guess we should just accept all accounts as true by default, right? You smacked 20 babies, kicked 15 puppies, and cursed out 12 old ladies. No, that's not how evidence works. Failure to uniformly agree on how to disprove something does not mean that it stands as proven by default.
Jesus never claimed to be God. Yes, he did. He didn't say, "I am God, worship me," but he showed that he was God in many places in all four Gospels by doing things that only God can do. It's true that he didn't walk around before his resurrection claiming to be God, because he wanted people to figure it out themselves. That's why he kept saying, "Who do you say that I am?" However, after his resurrection, people figured out that he was God, and Jesus congratulated them.
Also, non sequitur, this is an anti-Christian argument, not a reason to not believe in God. But yeah, I don't care what the Bible says about Jesus and whether or not he claimed to be God. I don't much care what the Bible says about anything, frankly, other than as a way to debunk itself when Christians attempt to hold it up as the unabridged Word of God.
The later one of the Gospels was written, the more divine it makes Jesus seem, so we can extrapolate that Jesus was originally a human figure who got made more divine over time. Alright, maybe some Gospels emphasize Jesus' divinity more than others, but what about Paul's letters that fully confess the divinity of Jesus and were also written before any of the Gospels? So that breaks your pattern.
Also, non sequitur, this is an anti-Christian argument, not a reason to not believe in God. Honestly, I stopped listening on this one, because I don't care about which books were written later or earlier than the others. I'm not a Christian. I don't care about the Bible. Now, it was here that I paused and looked ahead into the video because I just wanted to make sure that there were going to be some actual atheist arguments somewhere and not just anti-Christian ones. And they are coming. I guess we're just slogging through the unimportant anti-Christian ones first.
The Bible supports slavery. No, it doesn't. Just because there's slavery in the Bible doesn't mean the Bible supports it. There are some Old Testament verses that could be interpreted as condoning slavery, but Jesus himself said that the Old Testament made accommodations to people's sinful state. And also, slave owners in the American South had slave Bibles for their slaves to read, but it omitted a lot of the real Bible, so if the Bible actually did support slavery, this wouldn't have been necessary.
Non sequitur, yada yada. But, the Bible absolutely condones slavery. Don't pretend it was only the Old Testament that did, either. You want New Testament condoning of slavery? Okay, we've got a few. Slaves, be obedient to your human masters with fear and trembling, in sincerity of heart, as to Christ. Ephesians 6:5. Slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything, and do it not only when their eye is on you and to curry their favor, but with sincerity of heart and reverence to the Lord. Colossians 3:22. All who are under the yoke of slavery should consider their masters worthy of full respect, so that God's name and our teachings may not be slandered. 1 Timothy 6:1. Teach slaves to be subject to their masters in everything, to try to please them, not to talk back to them, and not to steal from them, but to show that they can be fully trusted. Titus 2:9.
Why the fuck you lying? Why you always lying?
Christianity supported slavery. Well, sure, some Christians did, but all human civilizations have had slavery. Christian civilization was the first one to abolish it on moral grounds. The fact that you're against slavery is due to Christian influence. Also, most organizations fighting modern-day slavery are Christian.
Non sequitur, yada yada, but wrong on all counts. Some of the earliest recorded instances of slavery abolishment happened before Christianity was even a thing. And not in some small, off-the-beaten-path place in the world either. Athens in 6th century BCE, India in 3rd century BCE, and in China during the Zhou dynasty, all while slavery was still very much in effect in Jesus' neck of the woods. So Christians weren't the first to get rid of it, just the first to get rid of it in the Western world, which, duh, pretty much the entire Western world was Christian dominant. But even there, the first Western country to outlaw slavery was France under King Louis X in 1315. But though he was, like all monarchs of that time frame, a member of the church, there's no indication that he was motivated by religion to abolish slavery. In fact, the most major religious-based issue that he dealt with was when he readmitted the Jewish community to France, which his father had exiled. But then, as far as most organizations fighting slavery today being Christian ones, nope. At least, the biggest and most effective anti-slavery organizations aren't. Like, the United Nations, which has made anti-slavery a major part of its charter since 1949. Also, major international organizations like the Alliance to End Slavery and Trafficking and Anti-Slavery International, which incidentally is the oldest human rights organization in the world, FYI. They're entirely secular.
God killed tons of people in the Bible. Well, it's actually way more than that. God numbers everyone's days. He's the giver of life, so he can take it, especially if people sin.
Way to not address the point. The point isn't the idea that God ends everyone's life. The point is that he does so seemingly maliciously and without just cause. And saying that he's God, he can do whatever he wants, isn't a sufficient answer to the argument. In 2 Kings 2:23, God sends 2 bears to maul 42 young boys to death for the horrid offense of making fun of a guy for being bald. If your response to that is, he's God, he can do whatever he wants because he's God, or that it must have been right and just for him to maul those 42 boys to death by way of bears, then screw you and your little God too.
Atheist countries are more prosperous. Yes, it's true that Northern European countries are very prosperous and very secular, but correlation doesn't equal causation. It's not like atheism causes prosperity, it's that prosperity causes atheism because when people have comfortable lives, they don't feel a need to depend on God. But why are these particular countries so prosperous in the first place? They may be secular now, but they're rooted in generations and generations of Protestant Christianity. If you want an example of a country that's atheist and not rooted in Christianity, look at communist China.
I won't disagree that greater prosperity increases the rates of atheism. I think that's pretty well established. However, the reality of the prosperous countries of Northern Europe is a bit more complex than that. When the countries started to become more prosperous, they did so largely because of the adoption of secular law and government. When religious oligarchy is in charge of a country, especially Christian ones, things tend to go from bad to worse.
Expects the Spanish Inquisition.
It turns out, when governments aren't making laws based on religion, but instead on secular ideals that are inclusive to all worldviews and not specifically building their rule on a particular theistic one, things do tend to get better. Just as an example, since you mentioned Northern European nations and you showed their flag, let's look at Sweden. Now, Sweden didn't become an actual secular state until the year 2000. When the Church of Sweden was legally separated from the state. And what happened in terms of their prosperity, such as with their per capita GDP at about the same time? Oh, it started a sharp upturn, where it had previously been on a 50-year decline. You'll find much the same when you look into other similar countries. Once secularism was adopted as the main governmental motivation, prosperity increased, which then followed an increase in atheism among the general public. So even though what you say is true about prosperity leading to higher rates of atheism, it's generally preceded by moving away from theocracy as a governing force. But then you try to cite China as an atheist country not rooted in Christianity that is supposedly not prosperous? Dude, I think you may have lost the plot in terms of what we're talking about here. Now sure, China may be an example of a country with poor civil rights and overarching government control, but I thought we were talking about prosperity. China is maybe the most economically prosperous country in the world right now. Its economic growth is unparalleled. Sure, lots of problems with that country, major disparity between the rich and the poor, human rights abuses and the like, but those are cultural and governmental issues. You'd be hard-pressed to chalk those up to an overabundance of atheism, especially since there is plenty of religion still in China. Frankly, there are higher rates of atheism in most European countries than in China.
There's 4,000 gods that people believe in, and you're atheist to 3,999 of them. I just go one god further. Okay, this isn't the gotcha that you think it is, because the question of whether some sort of god exists is fundamentally different from the question of which religion is right about God.
You're right. But considering most of this video has been a specific defense of Christianity, for you to suddenly switch gears to an abstract defense of a wider belief in some nondescript God being rings as a bit disingenuous. You are and have been claiming that Christians are right about God and have the correct God to the exclusion of all others. So don't abandon that now. Defend why your God is the supposed right one and that the other 3,999 are wrong. But I've addressed this particular statement before. This is not an attempted gotcha against theists in terms of a debunk of God. This is a statement meant to address the common theistic incredulity that anyone could not believe in God.
How can you not believe in God?
Which one?
What do you mean?
Well, Zeus, or Ra, or Ganesh.
No, not those ones. The real one in the Bible.
Yahweh.
Just God.
Well, you know how you don't believe in all those other gods I mentioned? That's how I don't believe in yours.
Just like that woman couldn't fathom not believing in God, theists commonly have a similar reaction to atheists. So how can we not believe in your God? The same way you cannot believe in the other 3,999 gods. Okay, that's where we're going to break for now. We'll come back for the second half of Redeemed Zoomer's Answers to All Atheist Arguments in Part 2. Thanks for watching, everyone. Take care.